This is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So welcome to another exciting series of episodes that we are covering, not a new series, but a series which we have been now covering throughout this year, which is a special series of episodes on empowering women. And we have covered a series of episodes specifically on women. Why? In order to make sure that we also empower that part of the society. Because both George and I completely agree on this fact that women in this era needs to be empowered equally as men. And I think that's where our speaker from today comes from, Sandra D'Souza, who's also a speaker for us on the 22nd November event coming soon in just 3 weeks of time. The clock is ticking and the countdown has begun for that. And Sandra is the CEO and founder of Ellect. Ellect is focused on helping businesses achieve their ESG goals. That means diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there is no better person to talk on this topic of women in business, where I specifically believe that equal opportunity should be provided to women in all phases of life, irrespective of whether irrespective of their gender or any kind of other factors that come into play. So, Sandra, do you want to start off with a brief introduction about what you do in your own words before we can ask you more questions?
Well, firstly, I want to say, Saurabh, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's lovely to be here and to also have George as the co-host of your program. So to start off, I guess, with my background, I'm also an author of a book called From Bias to Quality. I actually brought a copy to show. The book was published just in June. And it was based on the interviews that I did with leaders, mainly CEOs of listed companies, and who have actually achieved gender balance on their senior leadership and board of directors. So that's, I guess, what I'm known for. But I'm also, as you said, the CEO and founder of Ellect. And what we're doing is basically bringing gender balance in leadership roles and also bringing diversity in suppliers to help corporate engage with small businesses of diverse background, just so to balance out the opportunities available for what I call the diverse small businesses. That's the backbone of our economy.
So, Sandra, we are talking about women and we are talking about business. Very important words and very important two words in one phrase. How far do you think we have moved on when it comes to the participation of women, specifically in industry and businesses? We see that Australian workplaces are now getting better in that. Do you think that we have walked some miles in that direction, or there's still a long way to go?
Well, if I share with you some stats around that, firstly, women are 51% of the population. So it also depends, I guess, I'd like to ask your audience as yourself, when you see, I guess, especially in leadership roles, do you see just as many women as men in those roles? And so, and I want to share some stats with you. So firstly, what you do see is in the graduate roles, in terms of university graduates, up until then, you do see basically equal representation of women and men graduates. And then after that, research have shown literally almost immediate, the graduate salary, there's already disparity. There is a pay gap, gender pay gap, and it gets bigger as it moves up to the senior management. And so I guess that has not improved that much. If you look at even the CEOs, I'll give you Australian stats for now, because that's something I still remember. Only 22% of CEOs are, and this is based on companies that has like, this is from the WGEA, which is the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, and this is based on data from 400 million employees and over 10,000 employers. And I think 10,000, I just don't quote me on that one, but I'm 100% sure of the 4.5 million employees. Anyway, so with those sort of stats, what I can tell you is that there is 1 in 5 boards that have gender balance. Only just under 23% of CEOs are women. And the pay gap is almost 23%, in terms of the pay gap between, for every $1 a man earns, a woman earns 77 cents in the dollar. So you may think there is some improvements, and obviously there are some improvements year on year, but here in 2023, the gap is still there and it still exists.
So before I pass it on to George, Sandra, I want to understand from you, what's the is there any step that as a community we can take towards that direction? Because I know a lot of things are talked about in the government and in the industry as well. Companies try to take their own initiatives as well. But is there something which needs to be driven from the community itself, where community drives it, and then the government also starts thinking and the companies also start thinking, yeah, we need to make sure that we have equal participation of women?
Yeah. So, as far as I'm aware, and I guess, wherever you go, and especially in Australia, there are no discrimination. Obvious. There's no place where it says women are not allowed. And we have some really good laws in place, and that's what the government has done. And so that there is this Anti-Discrimination Act, and it's not just the gender, but obviously in various categories and things like that. What does happen, and this is, I guess, what you're talking about, the community level, is what I call international bias, which is what is also known as unconscious bias. And that is that we all have bias in ourselves, and that we actually, without realizing it, and it's very natural, it's what we do as human beings, is that we take that bias and we make decisions, we have actions, and we do things not realizing that we have a filter in terms of what we do. And so maybe not community level, but I would also say on an individual level, is to start being aware of it, start looking around. If you see, if you go to a meeting room, do you see enough women in there? Do you see the diversity and not just women? Look at the company's page in the leadership team. What do you see? Are there any women in there? Are there any diversity in there? And so I will start asking this question and just say, well, I don't see that. Why not? Why are we not seeing that? And those are the questions I think if everybody start asking companies, asking people, and also see that in sports, by the way. I know there's a lot of sports fan, and not just women in sports, but, if you're looking at diversity, and if I kind of expand that category, have a look and say, okay, community level, you see a very mix of diversity in any sports, but why is it elite sports? It seems to lack diversity, or it's very hard to get a diversity. So that, I would say, is to start asking questions.
Yeah, that's incredible. So one of the best things about our podcast, Sandra, is there is a very good flavor of young and experienced mindset, that we always bring that unique flavor to this episode when I am trying to think from a very young perspective, and then there's an experienced mindset who thinks from a mature perspective, of course, and a wiser
Oh,
perspective.
you were about to call him old,
So,
weren't you?
no, I
That's
have to be
okay.
very careful. I have to be very careful with my selection
That's
of
right.
words before I start getting killed.
And I just want to say, I know George very well, so he knows that he wouldn't be offended with what I've just called him.
Yeah. All right, off to you, mate.
Okay, so there's a few things that this brings up for me. I think it's sad that even today you're talking about us starting to notice it, and it's sad that it's not been noticed enough yet. I can go back to when I was managing Artline, and that's 30 odd years ago, and I was talking about having women in business in authority back then, and I'm not really convinced that a whole lot has changed. I think there is a better awareness of it, but awareness is interesting. Change is actually doing something.
Yeah.
So, but we both met through BNI, which is a business networking organisation, and it's an organisation that encourages women to participate. It wants women in there. It desperately wants women in its chapters. I'm an active member of BNI in our chapter, and we just don't get women applying to BNI at the same rate as we get men applying. Now, that's not because there's not women in business out there. It's for some reason we don't get it. I've had a number of ladies come to our chapter and say, there's a lot of guys here. Well, yes, and there will be until you bloody join and start changing those numbers. So there's that side of it. The other side of it is that we're running an event which you're part of in a few weeks' time. As it happens, we have 4 gentlemen talking, and we have yourself, and we've already had people criticise us because it's not a balanced panel. The equality is not there. So, am I to pick people? Oh, we need 3.3 women and we need 2.7 men. We didn't do that. What we did is we had a topic that we wanted to discuss. We had a number of people that were available. Now, I wanted you on that because of your actual experience and what I call skin in the game on this very topic. Now, at the same time, yesterday, I was pointing out to Sarab, there was I forget what it's called, but I think it's called Women's TV or Women's something, which is exclusively women. So where does this all sit? I tried to sponsor a women's networking event a couple of years ago, and I was told, you can't sponsor this because you're not a woman. Okay, so there's I think society and business, there's all this conflicting stuff going on, and I'm not too sure how I get involved with it even further than where I am. And I think, Sandra, I would hope at least that you would know I've always been an advocate of women in business. I go out of my way to help women in business. I keep telling men we've got to stop dragging our fingernails on the ground. I think we've at least stopped dragging our knuckles. We've got to stand up a little bit taller than Neanderthal. So how do you see all of those conflicting things, and what do we do to actually go that next step again?
So there's 3 things I think you've raised, 3 main things that you've raised in what you've just discussed. So the first thing I think you talked about that, that in this day and age we're still, obviously that is raising awareness when 30 years ago, you've already started talking to that. And another stat I wanted to share with you is that as of the WGEA 2022 no, it wasn't WGEA, it was the Global Institute of Women, and they said that globally 21% of men do not believe that gender inequality exists. That's 21% of men. And in Australia, it's actually a higher percentage. So 30% of men in Australia do not believe that gender inequality exists. And the reason for that, and this is, my take on it, and this is what has been discussed, is that because it doesn't seem like that there is a deliberate, they're not aware of it because there is no places, you don't hear that women are not allowed to do things. Women are allowed to do whatever that they want to do, technically, type of thing. And so men are not aware that there are actually invisible barriers and challenges for women, and just assume that, all is fair and square with all genders. So that's one thing, is that is believing that there's no gender inequality. Secondly, the point that you raised about what was it about um, the BNI trying to attract more people and also with the
I feel
events.
that there's a certain pushback from women as well when they come to a BNI meeting.
Yes. So the thing is that when you think about the structure and the setup, and the same with organization, it's actually very much designed for men. So it's men designed for men. And when you're talking about organizational structure, the way before COVID, when we didn't really have that flexibility, work has to be 9 to 5 in terms of office hours, but women had the predominantly more of the caring duties, and trying to juggle caring duties and being at work and the requirements of work. It's very challenging. And there are actually a lot of systematic issue. And I'm not saying BNI has systematic issue. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that a lot of the way that things have been structured over the past few hundred years, and more so, I guess, in the last 100 years, is very much because it's designed by men for men, and it hasn't really quite adjusted enough to include women. And so what happens is it makes it harder for women to be at their optimal in that sort of environment. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that it just makes it harder. And so when it doesn't take into account perhaps their an inclusive environment in terms of how to give that environment that is suitable for both genders, then it makes it harder. And look, and these are all the little things. And like I said, I know that BNI is not deliberately excluding women. I think it's the opposite. It's trying to, like what you're saying, trying to recruit more members. But if I take breakfast meeting for example, I don't have the statistic for me, but statistically, it is the hardest time for a working mother to attend an event. And so if there's an event organizers, when they want to attract a lot of women and even women only events, one thing they don't do is that they don't organize breakfast meetings, because it just cannot cater for working mums. And then BNI being a weekly meeting, taking that one day a week for a working mum is actually very, very challenging. And so that's one aspect of it. Whether BNI wants to change that, because that is, I guess, the whole structure of breakfast meeting, it's up to that. But I'm just saying that that's part of the challenges. And so what is it that you can do to make it easier for them? And maybe a hybrid model. I don't know, or just be aware that that's your need to attract business owners who don't have caring duties, and that might limit some of the scope.
Sorry, Sandra, I was actually talking about the point that women that were quite able to join that morning meeting were resistant to joining a meeting that's already, as they perceive it, male dominant. But if we're not going to have women join in to change the balance, it's never going to change, because you come and she says, "Oh, I'm not joining because there's too many men." The next woman says there's too many men. The next woman says there's too many men. Like, where do we go? How do we get a better cross-pollination of male-female?
Well, it's not, the feedback it may say is too many men, but it's also the environment that could be could be too blokey. So, that's, if I don't, I guess I'm also guessing, because obviously I'm not there in the room, but not everybody would actually say, oh, the blah, 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 these are the reasons that the environment's too blokey. So that's why, but that's, for me, if I'm uncomfortable in a very blokey environment, or I don't think it will help me to be at my best, that is potentially one of the reasons. And I'm also trying to be, I guess.
Do you think the counter applies, where guys don't feel comfortable if there's too many women, and so we've got to work out a better way of getting both sides to forget what's happened in the past, folks. We've got to make an effort to get past this and go forward. What do we do on both sides of the camp to try and make challenging forward?
The dynamics of a women-only event is really very much of creating a very safe space for women to discuss many things. And we actually run Women at Ellect program as a career progression, like a career accelerating program. And we know that if we have done it for mixed genders and we've done it for women only. And if you have a man in there, even just as a facilitator in the room, the dynamics have changed. They completely change, where women are less likely to speak. So, and I can give you stats from, and this is more of the American stats, that did you know that when you have a meeting, and I know I'm going off tangent a little bit, George, but if you bear with me,
no, that's okay.
That in a meeting, 92% of the meetings, men spoke more in a meeting. There is another stat that if you have a men and women in a meeting, women speaks 25% less. And one last stat, if I could share with you, is that also, this is another study, all American, I have to say, is that both men and women are more likely to interrupt a woman in a meeting. So there are meeting behaviors.
So what do we do to start to make that change? That's what I'm.
So one of the things that I guess with our programs and with Ellect, that what we're doing is to say, actually make that conscious effort to give, to encourage women to speak, to ask for their contribution, and to make them feel more comfortable in an environment that is predominantly, cater for one sex. Now, just to also go back to your other question, George, you were talking about whether man feels uncomfortable. I've been at many events, and I've also and I know men do feel quite daunted in a room full of women as well. It does happen on both sides as well. It doesn't mean women don't feel like, I'm not saying like, when women attending, whereas predominantly male, it's not like they feel necessarily scared on both sides for women or men. It's just, it's not a very comfortable feeling for them.
Yes, I for me personally, I enjoy company of women in business meetings. I'm just as relaxed in there as I am with guys. But I know a lot of guys that they find that I don't know, they're daunted by it too. And it seems to me as though there's still a lot of work to be done with both genders to try and get more collaboration between both genders to try and get past that awkward stage, so as we get to that next step.
Yeah, and I think it's that proactive, inclusive kind of like on both sides to know that dynamics do change when you have both gender. Is one way of helping out. And I know that you're very comfortable in a room full of women, George, and I'm the same. I'm very comfortable. I've worked in male-dominated rooms, and I didn't even, and I'm used to, in my 20s, have been the only woman in a whole sea of men kind of thing. But it wasn't until there was one time I was working for Telstra, and a very, very senior, like 2 levels down from the likes of David Thodey when he was the CEO, said he was trying to support more women, and he said that he had to speak in a women's event organized by Telstra, and he was there representing Telstra management, and there was 100, 200 women in the room, and he just says he felt daunted by it, and so then he said, I understand now how a woman feels when it's the other way around. So it doesn't mean that when men feels daunted that then they're scared. It is quite a profound feeling for both sides.
So those that are listening to us that want to be more proactive, and they're in small medium enterprises. They're in the engine room of this country. What would be 2 or 3 things that you could suggest to them that they could actually start to do now to be proactive and start to help make the thing happen? Because this isn't going to happen in a week or a month or
Yeah.
a year.
Yeah.
You know, we've still got. I personally think we've come a long way, but we've got such a long way to go that
And
hardly,
yeah.
you know, it's hardly noticeable. But I do think that we, certainly in my time, and as we've all established, I'm one of the senior people here.
So just
I have seen a dramatic. I haven't seen a dramatic change, but we still need a dramatic.
Yes. So I think the answer to that is what I was going to answer to your third point earlier about, having more women, like, in terms of the speaker panel. Do you just, because I think your question was about merit base, because people do hire on merit base, but the reality is that the network that we all tend to hire through like-minded network of people that in terms of who you get, and there are actually lots and lots of qualified women who are capable of leadership roles or being in the panel, but you just may not know of them. And so from the interviews that I have of CEOs in terms of how they manage to achieve gender balance, and also what we encourage is actually championing women to come to the events or to be the panel, actually seek them out. And they may say no because they're less likely to be a public speaker. They're actually, there's another stat I can tell you that when you ask 10 women to come and speak, 9 of them will say no. You ask 10 men, 9 of them will say yes. So it is, so there is that. But you have to encourage them, not just ask them, but also we say like championing women to progress in leadership roles, or being promoted, is to encourage them. They may have some concerns, have a coffee with them and address their concerns and say, you'll be okay. We will be there to support you. And that's the step that I think everybody can take in whatever capacity that they're in to promote more women in events, in roles and promotions, because unfortunately it's one of those things that women are less confident about themselves and are less likely to push themselves forward.
If I can just share with people, my wife Sharon and I got married a couple of years back. It's second time around for both of us. And due to COVID, we didn't have a lot of time for our families and friends to actually meet one another. And I'm from Greek background, and when I grew up, all the men were over here and all the women were over there. I've never liked that at any party that I ever run. I always try to make sure that there's a mixing of male and female. Now, I don't force it, but I certainly do my best to encourage it. So Sharon and I were talking about our wedding, and we said, well, how are we going to do this? And we decided the best way for our friends to meet one another, we had tables of 10. And so on this particular table, we tried to do like half of my lot and half of her lot. So obviously sometimes it might have been 6 and 4 and then the other way. We had all the people that were more religious together on a table from her side and my side. We had the crazies on her side and the crazies on my side. We put them on tables. We had my besties and her besties on a table. And do you know what happened was we had this fantastic wedding where we just got this. You would swear that all our friends knew each other well before meeting on that night.
That's awesome.
And I think the business could learn a lot from the Sharon and George strategy. If we didn't allow it to, and I'm not talking about strict rules that you must have 50 point and 50% and blah blah blah. I abhor that sort of behaviour. But you can encourage that we're not going to allow the women to talk over here and the men to talk over there. We're going to try and get things going. You did that wonderful game when I came to one of your events where you just had everybody have to ask each other questions and learn about the other person. That sort of thing will start, I believe, to break down the barrier. But the other side of it is, if you're a male and you're in management and you feel that your manager, who happens to be female, is not getting the respect, bloody speak up.
Mm.
And we've got to encourage young ladies now not to take crap. You're not a female who's a manager. You're a manager who happens to be a female. And that it might sound that I'm just playing with words, but I'm not. There is a mindset. I have people that are doing this and this. One happens to be a female, one happens to be a male. It's not about it's a man doing this or a woman doing that. And I think if we take more of that approach, hopefully we'll knock those figures down to get them a little bit better.
I think everybody wants to take that approach. Everybody wants to be treated equally, but the reality is that there are double standards. And so, to take your point, that the leader is to make sure that inexcusable behavior are not tolerated and that people are terminated in that. And so that's what we want to see is just no toxic behavior, regardless of gender, and especially from men.
Yep.
One of the final questions from my side, Sandra, while we were having these discussions, was the thing that I was thinking in my mind was a lot of the times when I go back, I'm not as old as you or George, but if I go back to my childhood, and
I think you just called me old. Sorry. Yes,
yeah,
go on.
He snuck it in there, didn't he?
I know.
He was doing so well, Sandra.
I know. Go on, Sarab, continue.
Come the 22nd, mate, you're going to cop it from both sides.
So, when you are growing up, you are influenced by your parents, you're influenced by your upbringing, you're influenced by your school teachers, you're influenced by, professors in your universities and colleges. Now, I've been born and brought up in a family where women were always respected and they were kept as equal, and always, we didn't have any such conversations in our family, or I didn't have any incidents where men are always dominating or dominating on the women. So my upbringing is fortunately on the good side, but I know a lot of the times, because of your upbringing or because of what you see around you, you get influenced, and that kind of shapes your mindset and attitude. So do you see the society and the upbringing around you, it's also a very, very big factor to shape your thoughts around when you grow up and you start feeling that you are the dominant one and you have to dominate the other gender?
And that's all part of unconscious. Yeah, no, that's all part of unconscious bias that I was talking about. That unconscious bias is based on the upbringing, the conditioning, and the influences that you have in your life, as well as what you read and what you've learned for yourself. And so we actually have developed an unconscious bias, gender unconscious bias personality test, because we all have it. It's just the various degree, like what you said. And so that personality test will tell you basically on the spectrum of the various degrees that you have in terms of how biased you are towards the other gender. And so the answer is yes. That's what us humans, that's all we have. And because it's based on our upbringing and parents and religion and society, schooling, it's all embedded into us, and how we deal with it and how we apply it to every day, that's important. And that's what really matters. So we developed the test is just to raise awareness, because a number of conversations I've had with people who says, "Oh, I don't have any bias. I treat men and women equally." But the thing is that we all do. Like Sarab, as much as you have a great upbringing and things like that, you have some bias, but it could be I mean, some bias in terms of what you do with it, like you do good with it, how you apply it, because you're aware that women and men are equal. And so that's your bias to us. So bias is not a negative word. It's just what we all have. And so I guess that's what I'm saying, is that it's so part of I guess, the way that we operate, that we need to know that, and we need to be aware of how we apply to what we do at work, with people, with family, all that sort of stuff.
I mean, my generation, we grew up with, you wait till your father gets home. So you automatically are being told, he's the authoritarian. You know, men don't cry. Okay, we can't show emotion.
Yeah.
You know, you're weak if you do that. Those sorts of things. Don't play like a girl, and those sorts of comments. They're all comments that precondition kids. You know, if you see your father abusing your mother, if you see your father respecting your mother, different story again. If you see, I remember with my first wife, one of my son's friends came over to visit, and he was about, he would have been about 8 or 9. And I was cleaning out the linen press, and he came over to me. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm sorting out the linen press, mate." "Oh, where's Wendy?" I said, "She's mowing the lawn." "Do you let her play with your tools?" So he was gobsmacked that Wendy was mowing the lawn and George is doing the. Now in our place, probably 90% of the time Wendy mowed the lawn, and her reasoning was it got her away from the bloody kids.
It's the same with my husband and I. Like, what we do what we enjoy, but it's not, geared towards just the gender profiles type of thing.
Yeah. So I think all of those things generate an unconscious bias. And a lot of it, I guess, Sandra, has started before you even realise you've got it.
Yes, and like I said, we all have it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And Sandra, we have a lot of questions for you, but we also want to keep something for our in-person event on the 22nd of November, because if everything comes out today in the reveal, nobody is going to watch the movie. So let's keep something for that day, and so that our audience is excited. And I'm sure this episode will be a good teaser for people who want to meet you in person, ask you questions in a live face-to-face chat, not in a virtual one. So stay tuned for that, guys, and mark the time, 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. on the 22nd of November at UNSW Sydney, Kensington. Reach out if you want the tickets. It's free of cost, no charges. And Sandra, if you can also reach out to your network in Sydney to invite people. Just 2 hours in the evening would be a great chat, and would be a great time for people to network with others, because I'm sure there would be like-minded individuals whom you can connect with on LinkedIn or so.
Sounds great. I'm happy to do that.
And I'm looking forward to coming back and visiting us again.
Thank you. Oh, thanks for a very lively conversation. And I love your questions, George. And you too, Saurabh. And I forgive you for calling me old.
Don't forgive him. We'll get him later, Sandra.
We'll do the editing properly. All right.
That's right.
This is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.